Vikas Swarup wrote the book Q&A, which was then made into Oscar-winning film Slumdog Millionaire. He is now back with another book, The Girl with the Seven Lives. He is our guest for this episode of Amazon Book Talks. His fans waited for a long time for his new book. This is his first book in 10 years.
So, ऐसा क्या हुआ कि आपने अपने फैंस को इतना वेट क्यों करवाया?
थैंक यू अक्षय. एंड मैंने भी नहीं सोचा था कि इतना बड़ा गैप आ जाएगा बिटवीन माई लास्ट बुक एंड दिस बुक. सो द लास्ट बुक आई रोट वॉज द एक्सीडेंटल अप्रेंटिस. वो आई थी 2013 में एंड नाउ वी आर इन 2024. तो 11 साल हो गए. एंड रियली मैंने नहीं सोचा था कि इतना बड़ा गैप आ जाएगा बिटवीन माई टू बुक्स. बट द मेन रीजन फॉर दैट इज यू सी I already had a day job. I was a diplomat. I was a member of the Indian Foreign Service. My last posting, when I wrote that book was as Consul General of India in Osaka, Kobe in Japan. And I returned from there in 2013, having finished the accidental apprentice. And then I became the official spokesperson of the ministry, in which capacity I traveled to almost 40 countries. After that, I was appointed as High Commissioner of India to Canada, which was also a very hectic, very demanding job. I returned from Canada in 2019, and then, of course, as you all know, we got into the pandemic. And, you can't really write when people are under distress all around you. Plus, in 2021, finally, I retired from the Indian Foreign Service. Then there was a transition. I was transitioning from being a government servant to being a private citizen. I was transitioning from a government house to a private house. So I think once all those transitions were over, that is when I found the time and the space to start writing the new novel, and that's when I wrote The Girl with the Seven Lives. So कुल मिला के करीब 1.5 साल लगा इसको लिखने में, but I really enjoyed that experience, and now I am so happy that wait है, but I hope the readers will say the wait was worth it.
I think they definitely will, because I have read almost 280 pages of this book. मैं एक चीज़ ज़रूर पूछना चाहूँगा इस बुक के बारे में कि मैंने इतने पेजेस पढ़े. It's obviously very interesting. I wanted to read it very fast, but फिर भी मैं इसे बचाना चाहता हूँ ताकि मैं एक एक चीज़ पढ़ सकूँ. बट एक डाउट जो मुझे इस बुक के बारे में आपसे जो जानना चाहूँगा कि आप इसे किस जॉनर में डिफाइन करते हैं, बिकॉज इट टॉक्स अबाउट अंडर प्रिविलेज्ड पीपल. ऑब्वियसली इट टॉक्स अबाउट डिफरेंट सिनेरियोज जो कि मुझे लगता है काफ़ी सारे ट्रू लाइफ से भी इंपॉर्टेंट हुआ. मैं आगे आपसे पूछना चाहूँगा उस बारे में. But is it a thriller? Is it a drama? Is it a tragedy? What is it exactly?
You're right. I think this is a question I'm asked very often because, booksellers आजकल किताब को एक particular slot में डालना चाहते हैं. कि ये प्योर थ्रिलर है या ये मिस्ट्री है या ये घोस्ट स्टोरी है या साइंस फिक्शन है. और मेरी बुक्स को एक्चुअली क्लासीफाई करना थोड़ा मुश्किल है बिकॉज दे कवर सो मेनी डिफरेंट एस्पेक्ट्स. सो मैं अपनी किताबों को कहता हूँ दे आर सोशल थ्रिलर्स इन द सेंस दे आर रिटन इन अ वेरी थ्रिलिंग काइंड ऑफ वे. यू वांट टू टर्न द पेज एंड फाइंड आउट व्हाट हैपेंस नेक्स्ट, but they also give you a glimpse into Indian society, into some of the problems of Indian society. So the idea is that even after you have turned the last page, the characters should stay with you and you should still be able to think about some of the issues that were highlighted in the book. So that's what I call my genre, social thrillers.
So आपने जैसे इसकी भी बात की कि आप सर्विस में थे, ऑब्वियसली आप बुक नहीं लिख पाए थे अपनी जिम्मेदारी की वजह से, रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी की वजह से. एक चीज़ जो मैं हमेशा देखता हूँ, बिकॉज आई हैव रेड अ लॉट ऑफ नॉन फिक्शन बुक्स, whenever there's a book coming from a civil servant or someone from foreign service, you expect that it'll be a non-fiction about international relations or something about his own experience in the service. आपको मैंने हमेशा देखा है कि your focus is always on very different books, very creative books. I mean, Q&A was so creative that everyone was shocked कि कोई इस format को लेकर इस story को लिख सकता है. Were you in doubt कि maybe शायद I should pick a non-fiction because that goes with the service and the name? You have a natural publicity in that.
नहीं, एक तो देखिए why I'm attracted to fiction is that in fiction there are no boundaries. You can write whatever you want to write. You can write about whoever you want to write, whichever country you want to set your novel in. There are no boundaries. In fact, even the laws of physics may not operate in fiction. There's magical realism and things like that. So that's what I like about fiction, and that's what draws me to fiction. Non-fiction is also, of course, very important, and you being from Amazon would know that these days I think non-fiction is selling more than fiction. But you see, non-fiction appeals to the head. Fiction appeals to the heart. And for me, the greatest high a writer can get is if the characters that are living in my head start now living in your head or in my reader's head. So that is a very heady feeling. Having said that, that does not mean that I am ruling out non-fiction altogether. I think the world has become very complex and interdependent. We all saw how the COVID pandemic started in Wuhan in China and then caused lockdowns in the entire world.
True.
So the world has become very, very complex, interdependent. Issues like climate change, global warming, global health, international terrorism, they all require a global response. And that is why I think a book on geopolitics, especially from an Indian perspective, also appeals to me and could be something I might try my hand later on. But right now, the focus is fiction and the girl with the 7 lives.
Now I'll talk about something about that जो मैंने अपनी book में पढ़ा. There's a line जो एक character बोलता है, उसमें भी एक writer है, I think, that person, and it says that you cannot be a good writer if you're not depressed. Do you actually believe that?
No, I certainly don't believe that. That's my character speaking.
Okay.
And the character is a very well-to-do banker.
Yeah.
You know, she is trying to write a book about the underprivileged people, you know, and that is why, and her problem is that she believes that she is not able to capture that emotion of being underprivileged because she's from a very, very privileged background. So it is she speaking, you know, as her character, that I wish, you know, I had a tougher upbringing, I had a tougher environment in which I was operating, because then I could mine that experience. Now, because she does not have that, she is trying to actually get Devi as a little girl, she's 9 years old at that time, into her house to observe her and to mine her experiences for her novel. And then I also say that novel fails because, you know, it was not authentic at all. Now, you will say the same charge for me also, that look, you were a member of the Indian Foreign Service, you have had a rather privileged background, how can you write about the underprivileged people? So there I believe, you know, you can observe as much as you want, you can research as much as you want, but eventually you have to put yourself into the mind and heart and the soul of that character. And for that you need the quality of empathy. You know, it's one thing for you to have sympathy for a character, but when you have empathy, then you become that character. You start looking at the world through that character's eyes. So that's really in my first book, Q&A. Ram Muhammad Thomas was my protagonist, 18-year-old waiter from Jimmy's Bar and Restaurant in Kolaba in Mumbai, who has never gone to school. And he appears on the biggest quiz show on earth. And then I tried to imagine that how would I feel if I did not know whether I will get a roof over my head, whether I will get my next meal from, whether I will even live or die tomorrow. And once you start, you know, looking at the world from that perspective, then I think, you know, you are able to write from that perspective as well. So for me, that has always been the key, the quality of empathy.
So you talked about empathy and कि ज़रूरी नहीं है कि experience हो. But do you think that a person, a writer, even a reader, is a prisoner of his or her own experiences? Because कुछ भी हो, एक vagueness आ सकते है. Don't you think it's a risk to write about something that you have not experienced yourself?
No, so that's why, you know, you need the combination of the two. You need the observation, you need the research, but then you have to take that leap of faith and, you know, get into the mind of that character. So it's not as if that, you know, for instance, when I wrote about Dharavi, my first book, I had never visited Dharavi. But I researched Dharavi. I read 4 or 5 books about Dharavi, understood that Dharavi is the center of the leather industry in Mumbai and things like that. What kind of constructions you have there. So then you could recreate that impression of Dharavi through your writing. But not just you just imagine life as that character, because the background in which that character is operating, that background has to seem authentic. When I'm writing about Kottayam, then a reader in Kerala should not be able to say this is not Kottayam at all. So that is why that research and that background is important. But then to generate that emotional response, then you need the quality of empathy. That is what I was writing.
I think that's a good answer. तो जैसे आप इस बुक के बारे में भी कह रहे हैं, मैं Q&A के बारे में भी जानना चाहूँगा. It's a very different sort of a book. क्या आप जब वो बुक लिख रहे थे, क्या आपने इमेजिन किया था कि this story can actually be adapted for screen? And not just any screen, it will be an Oscar-winning film.
So BBC ने मुझसे ये सवाल पूछा था कि मिस्टर स्वरूप, जब आप ये नॉवल लिख रहे थे तो आप इसको एक फिल्म के रूप में इमेजिन कर सकते थे? और मैंने जवाब दिया कि मैं तो इसको बुक के रूप में भी इमेजिन नहीं कर सकता था, क्योंकि आई वाज द फर्स्ट टाइम राइटर. यू नो, नोबडी इन माय फैमिली हैज रिटन नॉवेल्स. आई हैड नो नॉलेज ऑफ द पब्लिशिंग इंडस्ट्री. मुझे कोई वास्ता नहीं था उस दुनिया के साथ. सो व्हेन आई रोट दिस बुक, आई हैड नो एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ सक्सेस एट ऑल. मैंने सोचा भी नहीं था कि यू नो कल को ये नॉवल जो है 47 भाषाओं में अनुवाद की जाएगी, इसके ऊपर एक म्यूजिकल बन जाएगा, इसके ऊपर एक रेडियो प्ले बन जाएगा और इसके ऊपर एक फिल्म बन जाएगी जो 10 ऑस्कर्स के लिए ऑस्कर्स जाएगी. हाँ, so this has come as a huge surprise to me. But then उसका reason क्या है कि even though this was a very local story, you know, I was writing as an insider for insiders, as an Indian for Indians.
Right.
But the themes it evoked were global and universal. And what was the theme? It is the classic underdog story. और underdog भी एक ऐसा, यू नो एक ऐसा कॉन्सेप्ट है जो हर कल्चर में है. हम यू नो जब अर्जेंटीना खेलता है किसी यू नो क्यूबा के साथ तो सब कहते हैं कि क्यूबा के लिए रूट करते हैं, यू नो क्यूबा द अंडरडॉग. सो वही वाली बात है कि the underdog tale is something that appeals to all cultures and all community, and my book was a classic underdog story. And also जिस क्विज शो के ऊपर ये बेस्ड थी, वो क्विज शो was also universal.
Universal, yeah, of course.
Who Wants to Be Millionaire was a global hit in 130 countries. So because of these two combinations, I think the book found a global audience.
I wanted to ask about जो एक पहले अपने क्वेश्चन की बात की थी, जो कि आप एक बैंकर के बारे में बता रहे थे, उससे मुझे ये चीज़ ज़रूर मैंने ध्यान दी कि अपने इसमें बहुत सारे चैप्टर्स हैं, उसके जो कैरेक्टर्स हैं वो ऐसा लगता है कि जो इन रियल लाइफ न्यूज़ है उससे कहीं ना कहीं इंस्पायर्ड. मैं नाम नहीं लेना चाहूँगा, पर एक क्रिकेटर के बारे में जो एक बाबा के पास एक बैंकर है जो स्कैम में फंस जाते हैं, और ऑफ कोर्स गॉडमैन के बारे में है, एक स्कैंडल है जो कि जुवेनाइल होम से रिलेटेड है. आपकी क्रिएटिविटी कितना इंस्पायर्ड है रियल लाइफ से, या ये टोटली ओरिजिनल होती है?
नहीं, देखिए किसी भी राइटर के लिए कोई तो पॉइंट ऑफ इंस्पिरेशन होता है, और मेरे लिए तो पॉइंट ऑफ इंस्पिरेशन इज ऑलवेज रियल लाइफ. और इंडिया के बारे में मैं यही कहता हूँ कि इंडिया विश्व की सबसे कॉम्प्लेक्स कंट्री है, यू नो सबसे ज़्यादा डाइवर्स कंट्री है. और क्योंकि हम 1.5 बिलियन लोग हैं, 1.45 बिलियन लोग हैं, इसलिए हमारे पास 1.4 बिलियन स्टोरीज भी हैं, हमारे पास इतनी कहानियां भी हैं. तो एक दिन का भी अखबार आप उठा लीजिए, उसी में ही आपको 4-5 प्लॉट्स मिल जाएंगे नॉवेल्स के लिए. सो जितनी भी कहानियां हैं, 7 लाइव्स जो देवी मेरी प्रोटैगनिस्ट है वो इन 7 लाइव्स के थ्रू जाती है, all these 7 lives in a sense are inspired by what is happening in India.
Right.
As you said, you know, the fake degree racket, the juvenile home racket, you know, what's happening in our hospitals, in our private hospitals, for instance. You know, all those have been, for me, they have been departure points for, you know, recreating that reality in the novel. But remember, a novel is never a reproduction of reality. It is a recreation. So I will take some elements from the real life and then add some fictional elements of my own to create my own universe.
So what is your creative process like? आप कब डिसाइड करते हैं कि दिस इज द राइट टाइम टू स्टार्ट? क्या आपके मन में पहले स्टोरी आती है, या यू डिसाइड दैट नो आई हैव टू स्टार्ट राइटिंग अ बुक, नो लेट्स थिंक अबाउट अ स्टोरी?
ये बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग क्वेश्चन है अक्षय, बिकॉज यू नो 2 तरह के राइटर्स होते हैं. कुछ राइटर्स होते हैं वो शुरू कर देते हैं और उनके राइटिंग के प्रोसेस में ही प्लॉट डेवलप होता रहता है और चीज़ें आगे बढ़ती रहती है. मैं उस तरह का नहीं हूँ, बिकॉज मेरी जितनी भी नॉवेल्स हैं उसमें देयर इज अ शॉक और अ सरप्राइज एट द एंड. तो वो शॉक और सरप्राइज को एम्बेड करने के लिए आपको पहले से ही उसके बारे में सोचना होता है कि रीडर जो है उसको सरप्राइज लगे एंड में. एंड येट रीडर को आप क्लूज दे रहे हैं, लेकिन यू होप कि वो क्लूज ऐसे डिस्गाइज्ड हैं कि रीडर उनको पकड़ नहीं पाएगा. सो दैट इज वाई स्ट्रक्चर बिकम्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट.
राइट.
आप मेरी 4 नॉवेल्स देखिए, उन सब में स्ट्रक्चर इज द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग. कि किस स्ट्रक्चर के थ्रू you know how that structure helps drive the plot along at the same time, and also gives you a very surprised ending at the end.
And a lot of flashbacks, I think. एक स्टोरी पैरेलल चलती है, बीच में फ्लैशबैक्स.
तो ये
that was very interesting thing that I saw.
ये जो in a sense मैं Slumdog Millionaire Q&A के रूट में उसमें भी 2 कहानियां चल रही थी. एक कहानी थी कि क्विज शो में क्या हो रहा है, और दूसरी कहानी है कि उसके फ्लैशबैक्स, यू नो वो अपनी बताता है कि कैसे उसको हर एक का आंसर मिल रहा है. इसी तरह से इस किताब में भी, इन दिस बुक ऑल्सो, देयर आर 2 things going on. One is, of course, she's being kidnapped,
right,
and now this masked gunman is putting her life up for an online auction. तो उस ऑक्शन में क्या हो रहा है, कौन लोग बिड कर रहे हैं उसके लिए, एंड देन वो फ्लैशबैक्स में कैसे अपना लाइफ बता रही है. और हर बार what you see is कि every time she is telling about her life and she is trying to get over that life, कि भाई वो खत्म हो गया, मेरा वो लाइफ खत्म हो गई, मैंने नई लाइफ शुरू की, लेकिन उसका पास्ट वापस आ जाता है. और इसीलिए हर ऑनलाइन सिचुएशन में जिन लोगों को उसने उस लाइफ में यू नो गलत किया था वगैरह, they are now there to take their revenge. So that is why in a way this is also harks back to the structure of Q&A, but again the plotting had to be very very astute, because there will be a payoff at the end.
तो आपने Q&A की बात की कि उसी तरह प्लॉट है. मैं भी जब इसे पढ़ रहा था, बिकॉज आई हैव अ विजुअल वे ऑफ रीडिंग बुक्स, मैं हमेशा सीन्स इमेजिन करता हूँ, एक्टर्स इमेजिन करता हूँ. एंड इफ आई हैव सीन अ मूवी बिफोर द बुक, मैं उन्हीं एक्टर्स को इमेजिन करता हूँ, इन द कैरेक्टर्स. इट्स अ नॉन सीरियस क्वेश्चन, बट आई स्टिल आस्क, do we see some person portraying this on the screen? And who will that person actor will be?
Look, when I write a book, I write a book. I don't write a screenplay. I don't write thinking that tomorrow this will become a web series or a film.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So, because, then you are neither going to write a good book, neither will you write a good screenplay. So I write books, and then if people feel that, the book is visual enough for them to translate into a film or a web series, then that's their lookout. But now that you have asked me this question, I think, India is blessed with a lot of versatile actresses,
True.
I think many of them can essay this role. But to me, the first person that comes to my mind is Alia Bhatt. But not the Alia Bhatt of the glamorous Alia Bhatt, because this is obviously, Devi is a girl from a very disadvantaged background. So I remember a very de-glam version of Alia Bhatt from Urta Punjab. So I think something along that lines, if you can have a de-glam version of Alia, I think she would do because this is a role that requires a lot of versatility, because she has undergone through 7 lives, and each every time she reinvents herself. In a sense, you can say even adopts new mannerisms, a new way of speaking, because it's a complete reinvention. So I think you need an actress who can fit into all those 7 roles seamlessly.
आप actors की बात कर ही रहे, so I'll talk about Slumdog Millionaire. The actors that portrayed the role, all of them were new, but they have reached global heights, like Dev Patel, Fida Pinto. Have you been following their careers?
No, absolutely, because you see, when I met Dev Patel for the first time, I mean, he was largely unknown, and Fida Pinto, of course, nobody knew her at all. But thanks to the huge success of Slumdog Millionaire, I mean, once it won the Oscars, it became a global brand almost. I mean, today Dev Patel is a very well-established actor in Hollywood. Frida Pinto has done a number of other films. A.R. Rahman has given music for a number of other Western films as well after Slumdog Millionaire. So, yes, I think from that point of view, what really, gives me immense pleasure is that Slumdog Millionaire was the first crossover hit. It was an Indian film which did well in the West. And that opened the way for so much of Indian talent. I mean, Anil Kapoor ji also starred in many Western...
like Mission Impossible as well.
And Mission Impossible, etc. as a result of his playing the quiz master in Q&A. So yes, and now, of course, I believe that Indian films are at the same level as Western films in terms of the technical brilliance. Look at Bahubali 1 and 2, and look at now Kalki,
and RRR.
How amazing business it is doing. So from that point of view, I think, we combine the best of Bollywood and Hollywood. If we have good emotional storylines and cutting-edge technical effects, CGI effects, then I think you have the best of both worlds.
I think filmmakers who are watching this should start working on the script because they have a brilliant script.
But you're right, that is, you see, content is king. In the past, we used to have the star system where I was told, I have met a couple of stars who said we didn't even know what the script was. We used to come on the set and we were given some lines. Because at that time, people felt that, if you have a big star, whatever he does, people will flock to the theaters. That has changed because of OTT and all. Because now people are spoiled for choice. So now only if you have a gripping story, you have a good story, only then the film will do well. If you have a bad story, even if you have the greatest stars, the film will not do well.
That is true. One thing I wanted to ask, because you talked about underprivileged and the character as well. A lot of things that the characters in your books, not just in this book, suffer are because of the police administration. And there is a sense of hopelessness when you see that, because you feel that if police will not be there with them, who will? Do you think that this is the real version of Indian police? Or if it is, because I'm asking not just as a writer, I'm also asking...
not. In fact, if you look at my previous book, The Accidental Apprentice, there you have a very sympathetic police inspector who helps Sapna Sinha, who's the protagonist in that novel. So, certainly no one... You see, stereotypes are bad in any kind of... whether it is film or fiction or whatever, stereotypes are bad. So, anyone who says police are lazy and corrupt and inefficient, I think is again perpetuating that stereotype. But look, I have to be true to my characters. My character is a slumdweller, which means they are living in a very tenuous existence where maybe illegal houses which can even be demolished and things like that. So obviously they are not going to have a very happy relationship with the police. Unless they are informers for the police, because it does talk about a particular informer as well. So I have to be true to the character that I'm creating. And the character I'm creating, plus she's getting into all kinds of scams. So obviously she will not be on the best of terms with the police, and the police will be looking for her. So from that point of view, from her perspective, the police are her enemy. And from the police's perspective, she is a criminal who needs to be apprehended. So that is why there is this constant dynamic between Devi, the protagonist, and the police as well. But that does not mean that I'm tarring entire police force with the same brush. Obviously, that kind of a stereotyping is wrong.
I'm at fault as well, because there are some good police people as well. Like Irfan Khan, the character Irfan Khan played.
Exactly.
He was a very good officer in the end. He turned out to be a good officer. Some quick questions I will really need to ask from the reader and the writer. Which is your favorite genre in books?
Well, I was always a sucker for thrillers and mysteries because, you're always playing detective, trying to find out who's the murderer is. And that, creates a special kind of an excitement.
Right.
Keeps you at the edge of your seat because you're trying to act as the detective yourself. So thrillers and mysteries.
And who is your favorite writer? At least thriller writer.
I have read all of the thriller writers, Agatha Christie, Alistair MacLean, Desmond Bagley, Earl Stanley Gardner, Irving Wallace, you name them. I've read them all. And I've enjoyed, one of my early favorites, of course, was Arthur Conan Doyle, who created Sherlock Holmes. And I think Sherlock Holmes is really the most interesting character because, to create a character, in the 19th century,
of course,
who's so multifaceted,
so
and
procedural and
so
everything.
quirky. He smokes a pipe, believes that, the brain can only store limited amount of information and only the information that is necessary is needed to be there. I really admire the way Sherlock Holmes has been created and how he has become such a favorite for adaptations. So many different adaptations have come of Sherlock Holmes in the 21st century as well.
Right.
Trying to reimagine Sherlock Holmes, but, solving modern day crimes.
Can we expect an Indian version of Sherlock Holmes from Vikas Swarup in the future?
Look, many people say that that's a very lucrative thing. You start a chain of novels with with a particular character, and many of my contemporaries writing fiction are doing that. But somehow for me, that has not appealed to me because then you also get imprisoned by that character. You only have to write about that character and his name.
Agatha Christie wrote 60 novels with the same character.
Yes. So for me, I think the excitement is, creating a whole new universe now with a whole new set of characters. And that interests me much more than becoming a Spider-Man franchise.
Okay. One book that has impacted you the most?
I think many books have impacted me, but my earliest reading was of Premchand, and his book Godan, for instance, which talks about the problems faced by farmers, the problems of rural India. I think that impacted me quite a lot because he was a very earthy writer. He was very connected to his roots, and he wrote about the problems of the common man.
Do you remember the first ever book you read?
Oh my God, that will be very difficult. I don't think I would remember the first ever book I read. No, I don't think. But I
first serious book you ever read.
But I think I was a very early reader. So I think even by the age of 5 or 6, I was reading even heavy duty books. The advantage I had was I grew up in a household which was full of books. My grandfather had a 10,000 book library, and he had all kinds of books. He was a lawyer, so he had legal books, but he also had books by famous authors. Khushwant Singh. So I think the first serious book I read was Train to Pakistan by Khushwant Singh, which is a heart-rending, absolutely tragic story about the partition, and the human cost of partition.
Q&A the book or Slumdog Millionaire?
Q&A the book any day. I think books are always much more richer than films.
That is true. Do you write your books on pen and paper or the computer?
No, in fact, from the very beginning, I have written my books entirely on the computer.
Okay.
For a simple reason, I have writer's cramp, which means I cannot hold a pen for very long. I don't have writer's block, but I have writer's cramp, and as a result of which, pen and paper is ruled out for me. But I enjoy writing on the computer. Even though I type with with one hand, and I don't have a very high speed, maybe not more than 25 words per minute. But just the sheer fact of typing, I think, allows my thought processes to work faster. And for me, that has been my biggest fear. Is always that the computer will crash and whatever I have written till now will be lost. Because when you write on pen and paper, then you don't have to have that fear. But in computers, especially with technology, anything can crash, anything can be hacked. So that is a big fear. So from time to time now, I send an email to myself, emailing myself, whatever I've written till then, because then it will be in the cloud and it will always be there.
Fiction or non-fiction?
No, right now, as I said, 4 books have been fiction. Fiction interests me quite a lot, but non-fiction also is attractive. And who knows, in the future, you may have non-fiction as well, and maybe create a new genre which blends fact and fiction.
That's a very interesting concept, because a lot of people who follow us on social media are young writers, and a lot of people I know are looking to break into the world of writing, do you have any tips for them? Some easy tips and some very useful tips that you think?
Yes, the first tip, and I think the most important tip, is write only when you have a story to tell. When you have a story that only you can tell.
Right.
Because, no point doing a hackneyed thing. Everybody feels that their grandmother's story is very important, but, it may not be so important. So so the first thing is write if you have a unique story to tell.
Right.
The second thing is test it out. Test it out before you publish it with people who will give you objective advice.
Right.
Whether what you have written is good or it is crap. I think that's very important. And then if these two criteria are met, then by all means, then you have to be disciplined. You have to write every day. So the best advice on writing I can give you is you can never edit a blank page. So write. Because if you don't write, then there's nothing to edit. But even if you write crap, you can edit it. But you cannot edit a blank page.
I think that those are very practical advice. So at Amazon, we have a campaign called Gift a Book, which talks about the culture of reading. And our book is a gift that keeps on giving. So we would like to know from you, आप ऐसे 3 books हमें बताइए जो गिफ्ट्स के तौर पर सबसे बेस्ट बुक्स है आपके अकॉर्डिंग.
So one book I've already mentioned, Godan, which was a very formative influence in my life. So I would definitely recommend a book by Munshi Premchand, Godan. The second book I would recommend is 1984 by George Orwell. It's a very dystopian novel, but I think it's very important because it warns you about totalitarianism, surveillance, and the distortion of truth. And in today's world, we are seeing, in this post-truth world we are living in, I think 1984 is more relevant than ever before. Third book is a very different kind of a book, but which appealed to me a lot. It was the debut book by Paul Auster, an American author who died recently. It's called the New York Trilogy. Okay. It's a series of 3 interconnected novels, which explore a lot of issues. They explore the issue of identity, of language, and of storytelling itself. And he writes so beautifully, you really get immersed into his narrative, even though he does not believe in resolution. But anybody looking for a quirky, really interesting work, I think should explore the New York Trilogy by Paul Auster.
Okay. So I really want to know, because I am loving this book, that will there be a sequel? Can we expect a sequel from this book?
Well, that depends. If Alia Bhatt agrees to star in the series, in the serial, and they want to do a second season, then probably I'll have to do a second season. I'll have to do the girl with the 14 lives.
So Vikas sir, thanks a lot for joining us. It was a great conversation. This is a great book and I would really recommend this to our audience. And thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you so much, Akshay. It was a pleasure. And may you continue to promote books because, book reading is very important and the culture of books is very important.
Once again, congratulations for the book.